Hi, everyone. My name is Lisa Bustos. I am your Central Texas family law attorney. I am based in Austin, Texas, but I serve the entire Central Texas region. And me and my firm, we are here to help clients through some of the toughest transitions of their life, including divorce, and to help them move to a brighter future. And today I have with me Amy Adler. Amy.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Adler. I am a CPA. I'm a certified fraud examiner, a certified divorce financial analyst, and a two-time divorcee. And I'm ridiculously passionate about helping people through the divorce process so that they can feel supported and armed with the important information so that they can make the best decisions for themselves and their families as they begin their new lives. Lisa and I are recording a video series on commonly asked questions involved with divorce. And today's question is budgeting. It's a word nobody likes.
No.
Do we have to do it?
We have to do it.
Why do we have to do it? And how do we do it? So take it away.
So in Central Texas, almost every single county is going to require, or at the very least appreciate, having a budget in front of them. It's usually somewhere within the local rules that if you're going to have a hearing of any type, you pretty much got to have a budget if there's family law. And you have to have it ready ahead of time and have it ready to present the court that day, if not before. Sometimes there's filing requirements to have it before. And the reason that we want to have a budget and want to be very aware and conscious of what we put in our budget is that the court is not going to know anything about you or your family. And you need to assume that the court knows nothing. Every single person who walks into my office has a different story. They have different bills that they pay. They may have children. They may have children from previous relationships. They may have multiple properties. They may have no properties. The court's not going to know because once you get divorced, you're pretty much running through the same system as everybody else. And there's a lot of variances in what people's lives are like. So a lot of times when I meet with clients and we talk about budgets, I tell the client to put everything that they can in on it. And Amy will talk a little bit about how we budget in a little bit and how we figure all those things out. But start with the premise that the court or the other side knows nothing, and that is our job to educate them about your life. So I've had clients in the past, despite my warning, say, hey, the court didn't even account for this line item that isn't on my budget. Well, how is a court supposed to know unless we tell them? So we very much need to make sure that we're writing everything down, we're putting everything in there, and having as much of a conversation with your attorney and with the professionals you're working with in your case so that we can ensure that everything is accounted for. Now, Amy, can you talk a little bit about, why a budget's good and how you create a budget?
Sure. And apparently my cat Tiger here is also going to help with the conversation.
Very important assistant.
She is, yes, and very pretty. So the budgeting process is important for a couple of reasons and from my perspective. One is in the process of divorce, it really helps us to figure out which of the assets and debts in the marital estate to try to negotiate for in the division. So, for example, if a stay-at-home mom has not been working for most of the marriage, she may not be making a lot of income to cover her monthly expenses and may need more liquid assets out of the estate in order to help get her through those first year, 2 years, 3 years after divorce until she gets on her feet and is able to make more income. And so the budget helps us to figure out how much she needs to have in a liquid form, like a cash or savings account, or even money market or mutual funds that are easily accessible, so that she's able to move forward with some confidence that she can pay her bills. So, and that's just one example, but the budgeting process really helps us to figure out the best division of assets for both sides so that we can be as fair as possible to both sides. And so that's one piece, but I also recommend budgeting, and everyone rolls their eyes at me when I say this, but as a CPA, it's my obligation to tell people how important it is to live on a budget. You know, it's something that we hate doing because whenever we look at our expenses, almost always we find things in there that we really don't need, or maybe that we can't afford, and that we really should not be spending our money on, but we really want to.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so I do it too. I'm guilty. So, you know, I will not say that I'm a perfect model, but I do believe that having a budget really helps us to categorize and figure out which types of expenses and which expenses we can do without, or if we're making plenty of money to pay for all of the things that we have. It gives us that peace of mind that we can live on our own after the divorce is over with no problem. So when I do weddings, I'm a wedding officiant as well. And whenever I meet with the couples who are in process of getting married, I always tell them up front how important it is to put a budget together for the two of them, and to make something that they can both feel comfortable committing to and sticking to, because we know a huge percentage of all divorces, especially in this country, but all over the world, are caused because of fights about money. And here's a way that we can actually help to improve this process and reduce that risk up front. Because, you know, even though Lisa and I both specialize in the divorce industry, we don't want to see anybody get divorced. We would love to be able to focus our practices on other things, but it is the way it is. And so we love being able to help support people through this process. And we also love being able to help teach people how to avoid going through this process. So I always tell people that it's an important conversation to have up front. Apparently my cat agrees.
Your cat is very strongly in agreement.
She's very passionate about this too. That's a different cat too. That's Annie who's talking about. So it's super important for people to be focused on coming together with a good budget that they feel comfortable, that they can live with when they're getting married. But even when you're single and when you're on your own, having a budget that you feel comfortable with gives you some parameters and structure. It's like, you know, we're not children anymore, and children love structure and boundaries in life, but even as adults, we need that too. And so a budget is a great way to give you that kind of structure that you need on a financial basis. I highly recommend it for every single person that I meet, whether you're single, adult, child, married, divorced, doesn't matter.
Well,
so go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it's important to note that, you know, having a budget, it's scary because well, sometimes it feels scary. There's a lot of reasons why it might feel scary, but sometimes it might feel scary because, you know, you've written in stone that you only have X amount of dollars to spend on a certain category in your budget. But in reality, as your needs change throughout your life, if you have children, or, you know, as those children grow, your budget might start to change. But having all of it tracked helps educate yourself, not just educate the court, but educate yourself as to what your expenses are going to look like, so you can start planning and give yourself a roadmap and guidelines like Amy's talking about.
Yeah, exactly. So how do you go about preparing this budget? This seems to be the most commonly asked question that I get. And this is from people, not just people who are getting divorced, but I actually just helped another couple, friends of mine, who just called me because they know that I have this expertise and said, hey, can you help us figure out how to budget our life together? Because we're about to buy a house together and move in together. And so I tell them, and I tell everybody, that there are tons of great tools available online that you can find. If you Google budget tool, you can come up with a whole slew of options that will give you all these different categories of expenses and income too, especially if you don't get all of your income just from one job. so then you have to figure out how to put different dollar amounts by month into each of those categories to figure out what your budget's going to look like for a given year. I don't usually recommend budgeting for more than a year because life changes and we can't predict what's going to happen next year. You might move, you might get a different job, you might have a baby, it only takes 9 months. So you might get married. There's all kinds of things that happen that we can't anticipate in the span of a year. And so I don't usually recommend going more than a year out. But a year is a good benchmark. It's a good barometer, and you divide up that year by months. So if you have any expenses that you pay on an annual one-time basis, then if they're significant enough, you divide it by 12 to put it into each month's expenses. So it's accounted for somewhere. I like using Excel because it offers the opportunity to do the math for you. And Google Sheets does pretty much the same thing. So you could use either one of those tools. I know Lisa mentioned that there are some court requirements associated with budgets, and they have their own forms that are not very user-friendly at all. And so it is important to be able to translate whatever you create in Excel or Google Sheets onto those forms if you do need them for a hearing or for one of those situations. And so, there are plenty of professionals out there who can help you make that translation if that's challenging for you. But it's also helpful maybe if you find a budgeting tool that has similar categories of expenses and income to what's on that form so that it's easy to just transfer over the information. So you put together your income for the year and your expenses for the year, and you categorize them based on whatever makes you feel the most comfortable. Sometimes people have 50 different categories of expenses if they want to spread everything out. A lot of people feel really overwhelmed by 50 categories of expenses. I personally do. I prefer to keep it down to more to like 10 to 15. And so what that might look like is instead of having a separate line item for my mortgage payment and my property taxes and my home insurance, I might put all three of those in one line item. Or I might even put all of those in one line item plus any household related expenses like utilities, lawn care, maid service, anything that has to do with the care of the house itself or money spent on the house itself. And then you can do another line item that's for your car. If you have a car payment, then you would have that included. And you might have the car insurance included in that. You might have the gasoline and any maintenance associated with that car included in that line item. Or you could spread them all out if you want to. It gives us a good picture of what all of your monthly expenses look like and what areas you have room to make some changes if you need to. If it comes out at the end, because you're going to subtract your expenses from your income, it's an income statement, basically a personal income statement. Your net income for the month, if it's in the negative, then you got to do something about that, because unless you're independently wealthy and have millions of dollars in savings somewhere to be able to cover that deficit, which you might, but if nice. It would be nice, right? If you don't, then you're going to need to do something about that, either by getting some type of investments or something out of the marital estate if you have saved some money in liquid form, like we were talking about earlier, or you might need to figure out how to cut your expenses, which is probably more likely the better choice for most people. It's not always the case, and you're welcome to argue with me about which is the best approach for you, and that's really a personal decision. But taking out some of your expenses may be a way, if you can, to help to offset some of that negative net income if you have that on a monthly basis. So once you put all of that together in the template form and have all of your categories put together the way that you want to, next it's time to start populating those expenses each month. And the best way to do that I recommend is to start with, take the last year of your transactions, get all of your statements from your credit card accounts, Venmo, PayPal, all of the different accounts that you have that where you spend and receive money on a regular basis for your living expenses. You don't have to get all the E-Trade statements if you've been, buying and selling stocks and all of that. That's not really part of this calculation unless you're taking that money out. So just the expenses that you're spending money on, and the money that's coming in too, especially people who are self-employed or work in sales on a commission basis. You might not know exactly what your monthly average income is. So looking at what it was over the past year and then dividing it by 12 is a good way to start with an estimate. So once you put all of that together, get all of your statements, you're going to categorize all of the expenses that you found in that time frame into the categories in the template that you've created. And that's when it's time to start looking at how it's going to be different after your divorce is final. Because most things are going to change in your life after your divorce is final. You're not going to have the same expense for car insurance. This is probably one of the biggest examples that I give most commonly because everyone experiences this difference, right? If you and your spouse both had cars and they were insured for both of you, it's not that your car payment or your car insurance payment is going to go down 50% because your spouse and your spouse's car are no longer on your plan. The insurance companies base your rates on the risk that you pose to them as a member. And so if they think you're in a higher risk of getting into an accident or having your car stolen because you're single now as opposed to being married, then your rates are not going to go down by half. Also, it depends on the type of car that you own too. If you have the more expensive, nicer, bigger minivan or bigger SUV to tote kids around and your spouse took the little older car, then your insurance may actually be higher than you expect it to be too. So there are a lot of factors that go into that little item. So I recommend to people that they contact insurance agents to get some quotes to figure out what their new insurance payments are going to be. You don't need to set up your new accounts yet, and you really can't do that until after the divorce is finalized anyway, but at least you'll have an idea. And so I use that one as an example, but really the bigger one that seems to affect more people more severely is health insurance, because
huge expense.
it is, and it can go up significantly depending on what your situation is. If you were on your spouse's insurance plan because your spouse had good insurance coverage through their employer, and suddenly you have no insurance, you could go on their COBRA, but then you're going to pay full price for that insurance that, maybe it was only 50% of it or 25% of that cost to your spouse because their employer was paying for such a big chunk of it. COBRA doesn't give you that benefit. So you may have to plan on paying a whole lot more to have COBRA. Or if you need to go on the healthcare.gov marketplace to get a health insurance plan for people who don't have opportunities with employers, you need to do some research to find out what that cost is going to be, because it varies very significantly. It could be that you may qualify for subsidies and get free health care, or maybe you even qualify for Medicaid when you're on your own, or Medicare. But if you end up purchasing a policy that is for you and or your children or just you, it may cost thousands of dollars a month. So that would make a huge difference in your budget, and it's really important for you to take at least a little bit of time to get some quotes and think about what that would cost. You really need to do this for all of your essential costs, things like food, rent, or mortgage. Are you going to keep the house? If you're going to keep the house, can you make the mortgage payment? That's a big deal. If you're going to move out and get an apartment, where and how much is that going to cost? If you have an idea at least of what that's going to cost for you, don't sign a lease yet. Lisa will tell you not to do that yet, but
sure. I do advise, for a lawyer before you start signing contracts and start signing obligations onto yourself, because sometimes what you're doing is a violation of a court order that you may not have paid attention to, or sometimes you're doing things that you're not aware of how it will impact your case. So always talk to me or talk to someone like Amy who can tell you to talk to me before you start signing leases and contracts.
Right. So my advice is really just to do research, not necessarily to take action on any of this research, but just to find out what ranges you expect to be these new costs. And even do things like think about food. I use the example that when I got divorced from one of my husbands, um, it ended up that our $1,000 a month food budget didn't go down to 500 just because I wasn't living with him anymore. Because when we were living together, he insisted on having Cheez-Its in the house and all kinds of chips and soft drinks and things around. But I really wanted to have more of the healthier options, organic, pasture raised, grass fed foods. And so my cost actually only ended up going down to like $800 a month or something like that at the time. So it was something that I had to really think about whether or not I could afford and whether or not I could truly make these changes because, I was going to be on my own. And so these are really important things for you to do as well. So taking all of these expenses from your past year and putting them into the category and then revising them what you think it's going to look like in the future after your divorce is an onerous, difficult process. And so what I recommend to people is to break it up. Don't try to get it all done in one night and drink a whole bottle of wine doing it, because you might end up drinking 2 or 3 in the process because it takes a long time and it takes a lot of headspace to do it. So what I typically recommend to people is first go through the past year's expenses. Look at that, get them all categorized into the format that you've decided on or that you found online and that's readily transferable into the court word version. And then leave it alone for a few days. Let yourself digest on that information and back to it a few days later and maybe start doing the research on how things might change for you. And really take this on one bite at a time too. Like this is a marathon, not a sprint, because this budget development process, even though it's only for a year, this is creating a habit for yourself and setting yourself up for the rest of your life. And especially because it helps to drive the negotiations for the division of your marital estate too. This does affect you for your entire life, even though your budget's only for a year out. So take it off in chunks, really digest the information that you get and take your time and ask around too for recommendations for people who can give you quotes, people that you can trust to give you reasonable, good quotes too. I mean, most of us know insurance people or, health insurance brokers and auto and home insurance brokers, mortgage brokers, all kinds of realtors, all kinds of professionals who can help you figure out what your expenses will look like in the future in a pretty fair and accurate way. And so I encourage people to reach out to those professionals and get that help because it will serve you very well in creating a budget that's realistic, something that you can feel confident will help you in the future and that you can live with.
So also one last thing to note before we end, if you maybe don't know health insurance brokers or car insurance brokers or home insurance brokers or any of the professionals who can kind of help us plan this budget, reach out to your divorce attorney, to your accountant. A lot of times we know those people and we're happy to give you a referral because we know them, we like them, we trust them, and we want to make sure our clients are taken care of. So if you found this video helpful, please find us on social media. If you like this video and you have maybe some questions that you want us to answer, please comment below and maybe we'll make a video about your question. I'm Lisa Bustos.
And I'm Amy Adler.
Thank you for joining us.
And we'll see you next time.
Bye.